Good evening, everyone. I wanted to do a little follow-up to the video I did most recently about recovering from different types of abuse because some things have been coming to my mind, especially when you're first starting to realize that something's wrong. I think most people, I certainly did, you go through a phase where you're not willing to talk about it yet. And this could be for many reasons. For a lot of us, it's you're wondering if people will believe you. You wonder how people are going to judge you if you speak out, especially if the person doing the abuse is, well connected, wealthy, perhaps even famous. There's that whole issue of them having social respectability, and maybe they've covered their tracks really well for a long time. Or maybe you're just scared about letting your story out there and just how it'll be received, how people will view you, and if the perception or the stigma that you're going to have potentially for the rest of your life for speaking out, because people will always know your story if you go public. Yeah, the early stage, and this could be for a lot of different types of abuse, narcissistic abuse especially, because as I've said before, up until probably like the last decade, narcissistic abuse really wasn't that well understood at all. Those of us going through it, like especially as kids, a lot of us, Gen Xers and millennials, older and millennials anyway, who were raised by baby boomers, dealt with it, pretty much all through our lives. But like growing up in the 90s, you didn't know what it was. You knew something was wrong, but you thought maybe that your parents or your extended family were just these masterminds that, were so smart and could be so devious and, uh, so cunning that they could do this type of abuse and no one else could see it. Or, especially when you're a kid, they get inside your head and you think things like, and I thought this during my whole bullying ordeal last year was, is there something wrong with me that everybody can see but me? And that's a common problem when you face abuse, especially like if nobody around you is speaking up for you or encouraging you, to say something. You think, is there something wrong with me that no one else can see, or can nobody else see what's going on? But a lot of times, people in general are just afraid to speak up, especially if the person's in a position of power. This is especially true in the work environment where the person abusing you or others, or perhaps multiple people in some instances, I'm sure, people are afraid to speak up in that environment because this person has authority over you and they either insinuate, flat out tell you, or you get the feeling as if they could obliterate your and destroy your career at any given moment, and there's nothing you can do about it because they're them and you're you. And especially if you're in a job you've wanted most of your life, you tend to put up with it because you think, oh, I can get through this. It'll be over soon, and I'll finally have everything I want. And it doesn't always work out like that. Usually when abuse starts, it doesn't stop until it's called out. But my main purpose of this video was, to give my advice as a non-professional in the matter. Again, this is just what I did and what I've heard others say they did, and it may be helpful advice to consider aside from seeking professional help. If you're not ready to talk to somebody about the abuse you underwent, try to understand what it is you went through. Like, this is where things like YouTube channels come in. Learn about narcissistic abuse, hear other people's stories be told on channels, learn the tactics, learn perhaps why you were targeted, learn things of that nature, become familiar with the terminology of what was done to you, what tactics are used to discredit you, to abuse you, to exploit you, etc. Learn about yourself too. I mean, I know if you're on this channel, you're most likely an INFJ or an ENFJ, but I found it very helpful in understanding myself, you know, in learning about my personality type. And I knew what it was for years without really looking into it until just a couple years ago. And it was really enlightening for me as it is for many others. And that's particularly true for us intuitive types because we're so different than the quote, mainstream censor types, and the fact that we're so rare. It's very rare that we'll find somebody, in our day-to-day life that we get to know well that has our same personality just by the sheer rarity of it. So this is where, YouTube channels or reading or documentaries and learning about situations similar to yours are so important. And by hearing other people tell their story, or hear, other people talk about how they felt after they spoke out against the abuse they underwent, can be very helpful. I mean, I listened to narcissistic abuse channels for about 4 years before I ever told my story. I wrote into one, a channel who, though I disagree with a lot of what he has to say politically and about topics such as feminism, and this is Ollie Matthews, he's more right-wing conservative, I'm a progressive, but one thing that he seemed to really know was narcissistic abuse, specifically narcissistic abuse done by baby boomers. He seems to know the baby boomer tactics inside and out. And just because you disagree with somebody politically and on some other social topics doesn't negate the knowledge he has on a certain topic. So I would recommend parts of Ollie's channel. It's called Refuge from Narcissism. His early videos where he tells his stories I found very helpful. This before he got political. And then the majority of, he has a playlist about narcissistic baby boomers. I would recommend that. And you can go in on my channel under my narcissistic abuse folder, and it's 3 videos that he created for me over the years that gives an overview of the narcissistic abuse that I suffered, throughout my childhood and early adult life. And there's some really interesting tactics in there, specifically, the tactic of boomers and their I just know logic. And that's something abusers will do. They'll discredit everything you try to say. Doesn't matter. They don't care about facts. They don't care about evidence, witnesses. They just know. They live in their own reality. So in their minds, whatever they say is real becomes real. And this is particularly true about baby boomers. I often said, that they believe if they say something, reality will bend its will around it because, the boomers are oh so perfect and oh so knowledgeable, and they view themselves as demigods. And in my experience, in my family, that's how a lot of them act, and they continue to this day. And as they get older, it gets worse, and they kind of become characters of themselves. Like, it's not even, as they get older and their minds start to dull a little bit, they're not even trying to cover their abuse. They're just flat out saying, I'm a baby boomer, so I'm entitled to treat everybody younger than a baby boomer like this because I'm me, and we're perfect, and what I say goes. And it's like, but who gave you this power? Who said you're perfect? Well, we did. Now, was a little interesting little tidbit that I wanted to mention on terms of baby boomer narcissistic abuse is some people try to dismiss it as, oh, well, they're the elder generation, and they think they know because they're older. No, they always acted like this. Like, I can recall as a kid in the 90s, boomers acting like as if they knew better than everybody else, and this was when their parents, the World War II generation, was still around. So they were doing this long before they became the quote graybeards of society. Another pattern I found in people I've talked to in person and YouTube videos I've watched, or people I've exchanged comments with on other channels about abuse, and it's a big point that a lot of people are making right now, whether it's politically or whether it's in movements like Me Too or just people in general speaking out against abuse. The majority of the people, abusing people beyond any other group is white baby boomer men. It's just true. If you listen to people's stories, the majority of abusers, the ones that feel entitled and feel they have the right to abuse people. I'm not saying there aren't abusers that are younger than baby boomers. There certainly are. There's certainly female abusers as well. There's certainly minority abusers as well. I'm saying the plurality The largest percentage of abusers of any group is white baby boomer men. And a lot of that has to do to their entitlement, and a lot of it has to do to the power they wield. They've wielded power since, the 1980s, and they're dying to stay relevant. They do not want to pass that torch, which is another trait of the baby boomer generation. They do not want to pass that torch to the younger generation. They want to keep the system exactly how it is because this system was made by them and for them in the 80s and at the expense of everybody else. So before I get too off track about that, I'll just mention that I plan to do a video in the near future, what I call the narcissism of neoliberalism, and it's going to be from the perspective of a progressive, but I'm going to also add some similar things that more libertarian-leaning people that I've listened to and know have said, and we come to similar conclusions on a lot of topics. How the reason a lot of our problems exist today is because of neoliberalism. And what I mean by neoliberalism, I'm basically talking about the system that started around 1980. I mean, if you're in the United States, it started in 1981 with the election of Ronald Reagan, and shortly before that, in the United Kingdom, with the election of Margaret Thatcher. And then it corrupted the left-wing parties in our countries with the rise of the Democratic Leadership Council led by Bill Clinton and the New Democrat movement, which was pretty much copied by Tony Blair and New Labor, which basically sold out the youth, sold out the working class, and the left-wing party, basically became the moderate wing of the right-wing party. That's all establishment Democrats are today. They're moderate Republicans, and Blairite Labor are just moderate Tories, which makes me wonder what the hell's the purpose of the Lib Dems. But that's something I've wondered for a couple years now. But in conclusion of this, if you know something's wrong and you're not ready to speak up, absorb as much information on the topic as you can. Listen to other people and how it made them feel coming forward. It is a weight off your chest when you come forward, and you also it's also a nice feeling to have validation from others that went through similar situations. And most importantly, it's nice to know that by speaking out, you could potentially stop the same thing from happening to somebody else. And to me, that's real important. So that's just a little more advice on recovering from various types of abuse. You know, Obviously I went into other things to do in the video just prior to this, but not everybody's ready to speak up. So if you're not ready to speak up, learn other people's stories, learn what you went through, learn the tactics, learn the terminology, and decide in time if you want to speak up. There's plenty of channels and support groups that exist now, something that didn't exist when a lot of us running these channels were kids and teenagers and young adults. But it's our duty, for those of us that are willing to speak out, those of us who went through similar abuse and are ready to speak, it is our duty to speak up in order to get our stories out there, to have this known so that others don't have to go through what we went through. Only by speaking up will things change. The narcissist wants you to stay quiet. They hate the airing of dirty laundry. And it's the same in the workplace too. The good old boys club or the old boys club, whichever you want to call it. They want to keep it as it is, and they don't want their dirty laundry or their secrets coming out. It's when it comes out is when change happens, is when they're exposed for what they really are. And remember, you're doing nothing wrong by holding somebody accountable for their potential illegal exploitation, degrading, discrimination, any behaviors like that deserve to be called out. I don't care who the person is. I don't care how old they are. I don't care how wealthy they are. I don't care how famous they are. I don't care, what pedigree their family has. If they did something like that, if they abuse somebody, that deserves to be known. They deserve to be viewed at for who they truly are. Thank you, everybody, for taking the time. Please like and subscribe. Keep this channel growing. I want to grow this community and try to help and give advice to as many intuitives as I can. We're a small group of the population, and not a lot of people understand us, so we have to help each other. See you guys next time.